A reminder that you can find additional Unfound content if you sign up at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. On September 22nd, 2017, this podcast first featured the disappearance of Marilyn Renee Nicole McCown, a mother of one who disappeared from Richmond, Indiana on July 22nd, 2001. Today, we revisit her still unsolved case with more eyes and more experience by replaying the original interview with following new commentary from yours truly. I'm Ed Dunsel, and this is Unfound. Do you have any warning signs going on in your life right now? If you need to pause this podcast to think about it, go ahead and do so. Make a quick examination. I'll be here when you get back. Because taking those 10 or 30 seconds or a minute may just save you a lot of time, money, or even your life. My perception is we get so caught up in our daily patterns, we can't wait for quitting time or the weekend or vacation, driving that same loop over and over, that we put off or ignore those things that are happening outside of that pattern. Why am I losing weight for no reason? Why is my husband staying late at work again? Why is my company cutting back here and there? All signs that something needs to be done or something is wrong, but many times we don't do anything until it's too late because it doesn't fit the story we're trying to write for our life. In Niqui McCown's case, she was a successful, ambitious, educated woman who had many things going for her. Beautiful daughter, fiancé, large family who loved her. She had a work ethic and personality type that had taken her places and was going to take her places, maybe even to the FBI. But there were warning signs. The coworker who wouldn't leave her alone. A woman who had a beef with Niqui going back a decade. The fiancé who wanted her to be someone else. And I think Niqui perceived these problems, but I'm not sure she saw them as warning signs of more trouble to come. Like everything else in her life to that point, she would overcome them through hard work and keeping her eye on her life. But then trouble came, and Niqui was gone. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charleyproject.org. Niqui McCown was last seen at her mother's house in Richmond, Indiana around 3 p.m. on July 22, 2001. Before that, she had stopped at the Richmond Coin Laundry to wash her clothes. It is believed Niqui visited her mother while the clothes were in the dryer. While at her mother's, Niqui appeared nervous, although she would not tell her mother why. This was not unusual for Niqui due to her personality type of relying on herself to solve the problems in her life. Niqui made a couple of phone calls, including one to a coworker to ask her about some vitamins Niqui was interested in. Niqui then left her mother's and was never seen again. Contrary to published reports, there's no videotape showing her loading her clothes into her GMC Jimmy after she was done at the laundromat. Instead, there is a videotape from a convenience store near the laundromat that shows Niqui entering, getting change from the cashier, then leaving. According to the timestamp on this video, Niqui entered the store before she went to her mother's. Over 3 months later, Niqui's SUV was found in an apartment complex 45 minutes away in Dayton, Ohio. Coincidentally, this is the exact same complex where the father of Niqui's daughter was living at the time. One of the door locks on the vehicle had been punched out. The radio was missing, but Niqui's clothes were still in the back seat, folded neatly. Of note, this vehicle was not Niqui's. It was her fiancé's, and he was driving her car that day. They were due to be married in August of 2001. Niqui was working at a prison at the time of her disappearance. She was friends with a coworker, Tommy Swint, who was later discovered to be the prime suspect in the murder of a woman in Dayton in 1991. However, this information was not known at the time of Niqui's disappearance. In addition, Niqui's fiancé, Bobby Webster, acted very strangely on the day of Niqui's disappearance and later failed a lie detector test when asked about Niqui. Niqui also had threats made against her by Bobby's ex, who was the mother of his child. Niqui's case remains unsolved. Her family suspects foul play. The interview for this episode is with Niqui's sister, Michelle McCown Luster. Unfound news. The next time you hear my voice, I will be in Pennsylvania to see my dad for a little bit. Disc golf, seeing other family, and going to see Winger, yes really, are on the agenda. Next, I interviewed an FBI agent for almost 4 hours this past week, and the next day she interviewed me. We will be appearing on each other's podcasts in the upcoming weeks. You're gonna love it. Finally, I believe the TV show I worked on in Greeley, Colorado back in December 2023 is supposed to be coming out in August. I will keep you posted. Please contemplate these 3 questions as you listen to the 2017 interview with Niqui's sister. Number 1. Even in an effort to stage the vehicle Niqui drove, would Tommy Swint really leave it so close to where he lived? Number 2, given everything, are you really sure Niqui had the intention of getting married? And number 3, do you find it a little too coincidental that Niqui told the story about the Hispanic men harassing her on the very day she went missing? I'm very fortunate to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Niqui McCown, Michelle McCown Luster. Michelle, welcome to Unfound.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Tell the listeners a little bit about Niqui. Growing up with her, were you her older or younger sister? What are some of the memories you have of Niqui?
Me and Niqui are a year and a half apart. We have always been very close. If you see one, you see the other. I was more shy and more introverted, where I kind of didn't socialize as much as Niqui. She was outgoing. She was very outspoken. She was a cheerleader in high school. She was a daredevil. She liked to try new things. And that's where we were opposite, because I'm like, no, I'm not trying that.
Mm-hmm.
And she's more so, I will try, jumping, doing anything, jumping off the bike and stuff like that as children. Niqui, she was very academically inclined. She was, at the time of her disappearance, she was going to St. Clair Community College. She was on the dean's list. She had a couple applications. One was she couldn't decide whether she wanted to be an FBI agent or a U.S. Marshal. She was really into making a difference, or making change, or trying to help someone that may have made a couple mistakes. And she was on the hostage negotiation team at the prison, MEPRC. And she was really liked there. I mean, everybody liked her. She's very beautiful, so she's got a lot of attention from men there. And a lot of females, some of them kind of distanced themselves from her because she got so much attention from men.
Maybe a little jealous?
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah. She worked at a pre-release center which was for men. So at first she was a correctional officer. She did that for about I want to say about 5 or 6 years. And then she went upstairs to the office where she was an accounting. She was in the accounting department. And that's where she was at the time of her disappearance.
So she was very ambitious with her schooling, with her interests. She liked to get out. She was getting furthering her education at the time of her disappearance. This is just the kind of person she was.
Right.
Now, in high school, this is a guy who is going to, I guess, play a role. We're not saying that he had anything to do with this disappearance. The listeners will eventually have to determine that for themselves. But in high school, she met a Bobby Webster. What can you tell the listeners about Bobby Webster? What you remember about him from those early days when he and Niqui first met?
Okay. In fact, we met. I had just got to high school. I believe Niqui was getting ready to go to high school. And I started talking to Bobby's best friend at the time. And since me and Niqui was always together, when he would bring Bobby around, him and Niqui would talk back and forth. And that's how they first, started seeing one another. At the time, Bobby, he was rather on the player side. He had quite a few different girlfriends other than Niqui. And one who he had a child with, she would give Niqui a real hard time. It seemed like Bobby was just going from one to another, and he was kind of making the girls kind of jealous. I don't think Niqui was really ever jealous of her, but I think the girl really had it in for Niqui.
And so they met quite early on then. They were like maybe 15, 16 years old when they first met? And did they date in high school then? Is that the situation?
Yeah. Well, Niqui was 14, and he was in high school. So Niqui was just getting ready to go into high school, and he was getting ready to graduate. So when he graduated, that was right when Niqui was getting to high school. So her and the girl would have bump-ins all the time, and there's a couple of times that they, almost fought in the bathroom, and they were like following, her and her friends were following Niqui home, and I mean, just a whole bunch of chaos. And so,
teenager stuff.
Yeah. And there was another female that he was seeing that her and Niqui had encountered one another, but they talked it out, and they realized that Robert was just being a player, and they left it alone. But apparently his son's mother, she was more of a stalker, where she was starting to stalk this young lady at work and things like that, to where she was having to have police escorts. She worked at a mall, and she was having to have police escorts to her car because she was that scared. And then
was this all the reason that maybe Bobby and Niqui did not end up together at the time? Now, we know later, we're going to get to that later, where, of course, they were going to get married several years later. But back at this time, were these women the reason that Niqui and Bobby didn't stay together?
Right. Yeah, because he went off and moved to California. Niqui, at the time, had met her daughter's father, and they started seeing one another. And then they got serious, and then she had her daughter. And years, and I can't remember exactly how many years had went past. But she had Peyton. I think it was 92, 93. And Bobby had came back to Richmond right around 97, 98. Yeah. And
what was your opinion on Bobby, just in general, knowing him back then at maybe 18, 19? Do you think could he be a violent guy, or was he just this guy like to play around with a variety of women? How would you
yeah,
portray him?
at the time, I just portrayed him as a man that just liked a variety of women. I didn't see a violent streak in him, by no means, but he did like the ladies.
Okay.
And they seemed to like him.
She moves on. He moves to California for whatever reason. As you just said, Niqui meets this new guy. His name is Steve. We're not going to use his last name. But Niqui and Steve have the relationship. She has their daughter, Peyton. What can you tell the listeners about that relationship?
I think the relationship is right around 98, 99.
Oh, okay.
And during the relationship, they really seemed to I thought that, at one time I thought that they would end up being married because they really seemed like that they really, really felt deep for one another. They had a decent relationship, just normal, typical issues within a relationship. And I didn't really see an issue until Steve started. He had lost his job, and when he lost his job, a lot of pressure was on Niqui, and he was having to ask others for help, and that's where it went downhill. And he started asking coworkers and friends for help to get her by because she couldn't do it by herself.
So they had a falling out because Steve lost a job. Money got a little tight. We know how that can be. And so they split up. Did they split up before Bobby came back from California or after he came back from California?
Oh, before. Right before. It was within a month before he came back.
Would you say otherwise that, and Steve is going to be mentioned later in this case as well, but would you say that Steve, besides him having this problem with his job, was he a good guy? Is he a good father to Peyton? What would you say?
He was a great father to Peyton. In fact, when Niqui was working and he was staying home, he was with Peyton more often than Niqui because she was she was at work all the time or at school. So he was a great father. He seemed like, to me, he seemed like a really nice guy. He just didn't have a lot of drive in him. And it seemed like Niqui was looking to do big things, and he didn't have that drive that she needed in her life at that time.
He was maybe a little more laid back, and as you stated before, Niqui, kind of ambitious, furthering her education, wants to be in the FBI, climbing the corporate ladder. Okay. Okay. So then Bobby comes back to town right around this time, and what did you think when Bobby came back to town, and what'd you think?
When she had told me that she had went on a couple of dates with him, I wasn't amused at first because I know his history with all the ladies. So at first I was just like, okay, whatever. And then it seemed like it was getting more serious. And the next thing I know, they're moving in together. And I was like, okay. And she was just like telling me how she had, always loved him. She never really stopped ever loving him. And this is who the person she wants to spend the rest of her life with. And, I just went along with it. And at that time, he did seem like a changed person. He seemed like he was more so wanting to be with one female instead of multiple. It just seemed like the soulmate that, I just felt like, okay, this must really be her soulmate to go so many years without being together and then to reconnect like this. this has to be the right person for her.
Right. It just seemed like it was meant to be. Just something about it. Just something about it.
And he had proposed to her, and then we knew that they were getting married and stuff. It just seemed like, okay, this is how it's going to be. They're going to be together for the rest of their lives, or however long.
And what Bobby do for work? We know where Niqui was working. What was Bobby doing for work?
He worked at FedEx. He did that, and before he worked at FedEx, he worked at an auto parts store. That was when he first got back into town, and then he got a job at FedEx. And she was working at the prison, and he worked at FedEx. So they made a decent amount of money together.
Sure. How was their relationship, would you say? How did it look to you from the outside? You're married, you have children. How did it look to you?
I felt like at first it seemed like it was a good, I was glad that they were together. But then as months went by, it seemed like he was very picky. He wanted her to look a certain way. He wanted her to dress a certain way. And he just had a lot of demands on what he wanted her to look like. And she started feeling like she wasn't living to what he wanted. She would find magazines of, he had an infatuation with Jennifer Lopez, and she would find magazines of Jennifer Lopez everywhere, and he would always say, this is what I want you to look like, I want your hair like hers. I mean, he just had infatuation with her. And so that started making Niqui feel like she wasn't good enough for him. But then it seemed like things was getting better again. And then as they started spending money for the wedding, it seemed like he started getting a little upset about how much money they were spending. And although he made a good amount of money, Niqui still was the breadwinner. And he would tell her what she could and couldn't buy with her money. And she would get to the point where if she went shopping or something, she would start bringing stuff to my house and leave it in my closet. Or she'd take it to my other sister's house, her friend's house. She didn't want him to know that she was spending like she was. And then it got to the point where she wasn't just spending and people were giving her gifts. And she didn't want no one to know didn't want him to know this, that her friends and stuff were giving her gifts.
Of course.
And that she was spending money.
So they were having some issues, maybe not necessarily anything that couldn't be worked out. Maybe, people change, once they get married. We just don't know. But to your knowledge, you never heard about them fighting. There were no domestic calls, no calls to 911, nothing like that.
No, nothing like that.
Okay. Now, we need to talk about one more guy, and then we're going to get more into the facts of Niqui's disappearance. We need to talk about Tommy Swint a little bit. Who is he?
Tommy Swint is a coworker of Niqui's. He is a gentleman that was probably one of the first people she had become very close friends with when she first started to work there. He was also someone that was seeing another coworker that she was very close with. Tommy Swint seemed to have an infatuation with Niqui, where he was always wanting to be around her, asking her to introduce her to her friends. she would, when money got short when she was with her daughter's father, he would help her out from time to time. And then it got to the point where he just started buying her things. And even if she told him not to, he was still buying things. So I think that Tommy Swint, in fact, I know that Tommy Swint had a thing for Niqui, but Niqui didn't feel the same way about Tommy Swint. And
was Tommy married?
Tommy was married. He was married, and he had several different girlfriends, and he dated several of Niqui's friends, and he just always seemed to be in her circle.
And he was also having a relationship with one of their mutual coworkers.
Yeah, exactly.
So he got around a little bit as well. What year? How long do you think that Niqui and Tommy had known each other at the time? At the time that Niqui disappeared in 2001. How many years do you think they'd known each other?
Okay, if I remember right, she started working there in 1994, and she came up missing in 2001. So, what, about 8 years? 7 or 8 years?
7 or 8 years. So they knew each other, seeing each other maybe 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
Working in a situation where it's important that everybody, all the people get along. You're working there at a prison. Who knows what can happen? Everybody has to watch each other's back. There has to be a lot of trust, I guess, between people. And so would you say that Tommy would have been considered a friend of Niqui's? Would she have called him a friend, or was he just kind of a guy that she just was friends with just because they worked together?
No, she considered him a friend. They seemed to have that kind of relationship where he was helping her out, and he seemed like at first he seemed like it was all in good intentions. But then as years progressed, you could tell it was for other reasons.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, just to be honest, just have to ask this, do you think at any time in those 7 to 8 years that Niqui and Tommy worked together that they might have had a relationship on the side? Anything like that? No?
I don't think so. I mean, I believe that he wanted to, but I don't believe Niqui would cross that line.
Now, they had, as I have in my notes here, they had some sort of falling out, though. That she did. First of all, did Bobby know about Tommy, and did they ever run into each other? Were they friends?
Yeah. They went out to a couple clubs together. He knew of Tommy. He knew that Tommy was seeing the coworker, and he knew that Tommy was married. He didn't. I think he kind of knew, but he never mentioned the fact that he felt like Tommy had a thing for Niqui. But he did notice that he was always wanting to be around Niqui.
So Tommy and Niqui knew each other for, let's say, 7 years, but they had, I guess I would call it a falling out at some point, that she hadn't talked to him. Maybe they were working together, but not maybe hanging out, maybe not being as friendly, maybe for some months before she was going to get married. Can you tell the listeners anything about why that might have happened?
Tommy had loaned her some money, and he had asked, she was going to pay him back. I think she got paid like the next couple of days, and she was going to pay him back. And he had called her on the phone and had told her to remind her that she had to pay him. And she said, yeah, I'm going to give it to you as soon as I get my paycheck. And he said that he didn't want it that way. He wanted her to join him in one of his girlfriends. And Niqui just flat out told him, no, I don't do things like that.
So he wanted to keep it PG. He wanted to have a threesome with Niqui and this other woman.
Yeah.
Okay. And that really turned Niqui off.
Yeah.
And so that was started a fallout that Niqui and Tommy just
Mhm.
weren't as friendly as they were anymore. And I suppose I can understand that.
Right.
Let's move up. So Bobby and Niqui are getting engaged. They're making all these plans. And so let's move up to the day of her disappearance. What can you tell the listeners about that day? Anything strange about that day? Anything unusual as you remember it? And then pass on to the listeners what you know about that day.
I hadn't talked to Niqui in about 4 or 5 days. But on that Sunday, I was getting a lot of hang-up phone calls. Every time I would answer, I would say hello 3 or 4 times, and they would just hang up. So it really started to be annoying where I'm like, okay, who keeps playing on my phone? So my husband was doing yard work, and he needed the hose. So he went to my mom and dad's house to borrow their hose because we didn't have one at the time. And when he was on his way there, he noticed that Niqui was getting in her car and leaving, and she just waved and left. And 2 hours went by, and my sister was going to do my hair that day, and I go to her house, and she's like, have you seen Niqui? And I said, no, I ain't seen her today. She was like, well, Bobby is looking for her. He is going crazy. He thinks something has done happened to her. I'm like, why would he think that? Maybe she's out shopping. They are going to get married. And she was like, I don't know. So while me and her are sitting there, she's going to start my hair. He calls back and tells us that he has started to call her friends and stuff like that. And he really just can't find her. Something is wrong.
Where was she supposed to be? What did he say that she did that day, or what was she supposed to be doing that day? Then that he couldn't find her.
Okay, she went to the laundromat. And he went to the mall to get fitted for his tux with his best man. She was supposed to have met him back, I guess, to the house when she got finished with the laundry, and she wasn't back yet. So,
and what time do you think this would have been that day?
She had, my husband, my mother said when she came up past her house, this was between 2:30 and 3 o'clock. So it had to be maybe between 3 and 4 that he started panicking.
Already?
Yeah.
Okay. So she took his car, his SUV, a black SUV, to the laundromat, whereas he was driving her car. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Is this a laundromat she usually went to? Did she not have like a regular washer and dryer? Do you know anything pertaining to that?
She went to this laundromat a lot because it was right down the street from our sister's house. And normally she would put her clothes in the wash, and she would go sit at my sister's house while they washed. Then she would walk down there and put them in the dry, then go back to my sister's house. But on this day, my sister wasn't home. She was at the movies with her husband. So she was down at the laundromat pretty much by herself. And I guess that's when she put her clothes in the wash and went to my mom's house before she got her clothes to the dry.
And what did your mother say about Niqui when she came over to your mother's house? How long was she there? What was her demeanor? What did she say?
She said she wasn't there very long, but she was pacing back and forth, and she made a couple of phone calls. And she just finally said, Niqui, what is wrong with you? You just keep pacing back and forth. And she was like, nothing, Mom, I'm okay. And Niqui was the type of person that she never liked anybody to worry about her. And she also never told my mom and dad much about. She just always was so independent. She just felt like she could handle everything. So she told my mom that there was some Hispanic men at the laundromat giving her a hard time, and my mother suggested to her to go get her things and finish at her house. Well, Niqui said okay. Well, she left, and that was the last time that anyone seen her.
And what time do you think that she was at your mother's that day, that Sunday?
This had to be between 2:30 and 3.
So we have Niqui, let's say 2:30, leaving your mother's house. She's a little agitated, really doesn't say why, made it a couple phone calls. Any idea who those phone calls were made to?
No.
No? And she makes a couple phone calls. We don't know who she called or even if she reached anybody. She leaves, but then already, as you said earlier, like an hour later, her fiancé Bobby is already worrying about her.
Yep. That's how I went.
Okay. Do you think, at the time, did you think that was a little suspicious?
Very.
Okay.
I was like, why are you tripping? I mean, it's not even been a couple hours since she's supposed to have met up with you. I mean, why are you already panicking? And he was like, I just feel like something is wrong. And he just kept saying that something is wrong. This ain't like her.
Did he ever mention anybody? Did he ever have any suspicions? He just a general fear, I guess.
No, he just said, this ain't like her. Something's got to be wrong.
Okay. Well, he unfortunately he ends up being right because she doesn't come back. And
Right.
so when did you start realizing, or maybe your mother, maybe your other sisters start realizing that something wasn't right?
Well, that night, my dad had suggested that he go down and file a missing persons report. And at first he said, no, we ain't doing that yet. And he was like, well, if you're that worried, either you're going to go down there or I am. And so my dad actually went down there and got the report. And Robert and my husband filled it out together because Robert couldn't fill it out by himself because he was that shaky and upset and crying. I mean, it was like the guy really knew she wasn't coming back. It didn't seem like it really had set in anybody in my family. We never expected anything like that. I mean, we just assumed that, she would be back. Why are you tripping? I can speak for myself. It wasn't until the next day that I went to her job and I asked them had she showed up, and they told me no. It was at that moment when I knew something was wrong because Niqui would never miss work unless it was for a good reason. And she would never not call. And I just broke down, and, at that time I just fell to the ground and was crying like, oh my God, what's wrong? Where is Niqui? So I had seen Tommy that day, and he had said that him and a couple co-workers were going to be over the next day to help and pass out flyers, and, that was that. And so...
And this was all happening in Richmond, Indiana. Did you drive around?
Yeah.
Maybe did you call the father of her child, Steve, to see if he had seen her? Anything like that?
We called around to her friends, co-workers, hospitals, her job, of course. We was calling everybody. We was going door to door, asking if anyone's seen her. I know me, my husband, and my cousin had drove to Dayton that evening on Sunday night and to see if we could see her car like broke down on the highway or something. And we didn't see anything, of course. And then the very next day, we had more flyers. People were just, donating flyers. And there was he had a lot of people looking for her on the first couple of months of her disappearance. And everybody was posting them. And there was also people taking them down. There was also people saying that she's been found, but
So not only is she missing, though, Bobby's vehicle that she was driving was missing.
right.
Did you go down to the laundromat to see if she actually got her clothes? Did anybody down there see her come back? Anything like that? Any video camera at the laundromat, for example?
There was a video camera, but it wasn't recording, and there was a couple people down there at the time she was down there, and none of them seemed to tell us anything like there was anything weird going on. None of them could ever come up with the Hispanic thing. And so we didn't have no video down there, but we did have video at a convenience store maybe a half a block away. And it just shows her coming in. I don't know if she's getting change or she's paying for gas or what she's doing, but she's giving the cashier something. The cashier's giving her something back, and then she goes out the door. And then when she goes out the door, you see a Hispanic, not a Hispanic man, but a Caucasian man opening the door, looking right to left, and then he goes back out. That seemed a little odd to us at the time, but nothing ever came up with that either.
Did they ever track that? Were the police the ones that found that tape from the convenience store?
No. We went there.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Yeah. Good job to find that. Good. What time was that? What time was she in that convenience store? Would it have been before or after she went to see her mother?
It seemed like it had to have been like right before.
Right before. So maybe like 2 o'clock, something like that, 1:30 to 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And was the Caucasian male in that video ever located? Anybody ever track him down? Did he ever come forward? To your knowledge.
All I know is the detective working on it, he said nothing ever panned out with that gentleman. So I'm not sure if he spoke with him or how he came up with that. But he said nothing came up with that.
And so she's missing, the car's missing, her laundry is missing. I guess she did not find it down there. Did she leave anything else behind, like a purse, ID, anything like that?
Just her medication, from what I understand. I thought she had left her ID, and after I spoke with my sister, she said, remember, she had her ID and stuff on her with her medication and her wedding ring that she left behind.
Now, your family was putting these posters up. You're going around. Of course, you found the convenience store tape, which I think was a very good move on your part. What was Bobby doing during this time? Was he helping out? Was he calling anybody? Was he searching? Was he putting any posters up? Anything?
Well, he claimed he was. In fact, he had went and bought. He had like a couple cell phones. I don't know why he had a couple, but he had a couple cell phones. He took Niqi's wedding ring back. He said that he did it because he needed to get money for more flyers, which was a total lie because we were getting them for free. And I never seen him on any of the searches. We went on searches with the police. At the time, he was, everybody else was in bummy clothes. He had on creased pants, all cleaned up. And we asked him why he wasn't helping us. He said because he had to go down to the detective's office. And I guess that's when they gave him his lie detector test.
And what happened during, and how long was that after Niqui disappeared, and what were the results?
That was maybe a little over a week after she disappeared, and from what they said, he failed his lie detector test.
He failed it?
Yeah.
So in asking him about the day Niqui disappeared, Were they having any issues in the relationship? All those questions that they usually ask people of interest. He failed that test. Maybe not all
Yeah.
the questions, but some of the questions. The person who ran the polygraph determined that he was being untruthful or being
Right.
evasive. Okay.
Right.
Do you have any explanation for that?
He has said that his attorney had never got a copy of it, and that he's never seen it, and that he thinks that they're just out to get him. There's no way he could have felt it because he didn't do anything wrong, but he was taking some pills to try to calm down, and if he did fail, that may have been the reason why he failed.
Now, there was a story that I don't think I've ever heard, and I'm 47 years old. There was some sort of discrepancy regarding the arrangements for Niqui's wedding, which maybe to the listeners sounds a little hard to believe. But there was discrepancy about what church the wedding was going to take place at. Maybe you can explain, when did you first find out about that? When did you hear about that? And has that ever been resolved?
When we found out about that was probably maybe 10 months after Niqui came up missing.
Oh, 2 months. Okay.
10 months.
10 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was maybe close to a year. What had happened is we did a story with the Montel Williams show with Sylvia Brown, and they came to town, and they wanted to go to the church that Niqui was going to be married at. And the church that he had us take them to isn't the same church that she was supposed to get married to.
And at that point, of course, before Niqui disappeared, had the invitations already been printed? Was there any proof of where they were actually going to get married?
Right, yes. Her invitations have been printed, and they were filling them out that weekend she came up missing. So why he would take them to that other church, I don't understand why.
Do you think did you ever ask Bobby about that? Did he ever give any explanation? Was he just confused? Oh.
He said that they had just changed their mind after they had got the invitations done, which didn't make sense. Because why would you guys be filling them out?
That seems like the most inconvenient time to change venues when you're actually doing the invitations.
Right.
And all these years later, 16 years later, has that ever been resolved? Do you still, to this day, even know why that mistake or discrepancy existed?
No, still to this day, don't know.
To your knowledge, what is Bobby's alibi for the day that Niqui disappeared? We know what he said he was going to do. Did he go do that? Was he with anybody? Any proof?
He was with his best man, and they was at the tuxedo shop. But how long they was there, they said they did come in to do the tuxedo and stuff, and then right afterwards they left.
I mean, I've had tuxedo sized for me before. It hasn't been very recently, but that's like a 10-minute job.
Yeah, right.
And so if he went at noon, it'd be done by 1. And if she's going, it just depends on what time he was getting his tux sized at, I guess.
Right.
And you don't know.
They had to, if I'm right, church lets out. She had to leave him around 1:30. So he went there right afterwards. He had to be done no later than 2:30. And that would have been right around the time that she was going up to my mom's house. And then around 4:30, he's getting worried. I don't know. This seemed a little odd to me that he was so worried so fast. And
that does seem a little odd.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that he ever knew in the time that they were dating and then got engaged that this other guy, Tommy, and we're going to talk about him again very shortly, do you think that Bobby ever knew that Tommy was maybe doing some nice things behind the scenes for Niqui? Maybe could have.
I
Do you have any idea about that?
I think he had an ideal because he would like mention little things like I don't know why he keeps, um she told me about a couple of things he bought her. Who buys somebody something and they got a fiance? I mean, he's got his own wife. Buy her something.
Right, and of course, as you already mentioned, he had a lot of women on the side too. Tommy did.
Right, right,
So I mean, how much money and gifts and things can he spread around?
right,
You know, it doesn't sound like he was a millionaire. He was working in a prison.
right.
They make those people make good money, but I don't know if the money's that good.
No, no, it's not that good.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
but Bobby did eventually find out about this, and do you know how he reacted to it?
in fact, he found out after she came up missing.
Okay.
And I had a conversation with him because um, he knew that I had went to see Detective Redmond. This was right around the time her vehicle was found,
Mm-hmm.
and that Detective Redmond had a lot of questions behind Tommy and Darlene. And he was just asking me, why'd you keep asking all these questions about them? And then I just told him, I'm like, look, uh, from what I gather, he's a person of interest. They had a couple interviews with him. They didn't like what they got from him. They've been looking hard into his accounts and stuff like that. And
Okay.
he used to, buy Niqui things, and they have proof that he really bought these things
Right.
because they got a hold of his credit card statements and stuff like that.
And so we're talking about Tommy Swint in this instance. So after Niqui disappeared, we know that Bobby had a lie detector test done for him.
Hmm.
I guess he volunteered. I'm not necessarily volunteered for it, but as you know, sometimes people don't want to do lie detector tests. But he
Hmm.
chose to do it. They asked him, he did it. He failed. Do you know if Tommy Swint ever had a lie detector test done on him? And how much of a suspect was he considered after Niqui disappeared?
Okay, I know Bobby was kind of cornered into doing the lie detector test. He's kind of forced into it. Uh, but he did fail. As far as Tommy goes, I know he never did a lie detector test. I know they did get some DNA from him, and this was years later out of a lawsuit that he had started, and he was kind of on TV and
Yeah.
kind of pointing fingers here and there, and he kind of stepped into something where I'll give you my DNA right now. I ain't got nothing to hide, so they got it from him.
But at the time of Niqui's disappearance in 2001, it doesn't sound to me like he was looked at as hard as Bobby was.
The first few months, I think right before they found the vehicle, maybe a month before November, he was starting to get looked into deeper. And they were starting to, uh, they still had their eye on Robert, but they were starting to look more harder on Tommy because of the
Okay.
interviews they had had in the recent months. Right after she came up missing, they went to her job and interviewed everybody. And their encounter with Tommy was more forceful. They had to kind of make him sit down and talk to him, and he had sunglasses on all the time, and there were certain questions he wouldn't answer, and he was giggling and laughing, and it just stood out to them like, okay, what's wrong with this guy?
Now you have a story that maybe could have put, we don't know, Niqui going to Tommy's place on that day, and it has to do with a story that you told me before about some hair and nails and this woman that Tommy was with that he and Niqui worked with. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Okay. The day she came up missing, she had spoke with the coworker, Tommy's girlfriend, about some hair and nail vitamins, and she knew where to get them, and um, she said she talked to Niqui very briefly, found out they talked longer than a brief conversation of where to get the vitamins, and this girl and Tommy was living together at the time of Niqui's disappearance. On that Sunday, there was a couple of the neighbors in the neighborhood that said that they was pretty sure that they seen Niqui's vehicle in front of that house the day she came up missing.
Where Tommy was living
Yeah.
with this girlfriend. Now, how far is this house away from, for example, the laundromat?
Um, from the laundromat, see, because the laundromat's in Richmond, Indiana, and this is still Dayton, Ohio. So
So in a totally other state, different state.
yeah, it's about maybe 50 minutes.
So if Niqui wanted to get these vitamins, she would have had to have driven to a totally different state, to another city, 45 minutes, 50 minutes to do this. She couldn't just like stop by after getting her laundry done.
I don't know what the name of the vitamins were, and I don't know if it was like a certain place in Dayton that they sold them, that they didn't sell them in Richmond. But from the conversation that Darlene said she had with her, that's what they talked about. And from what I have been told by the detectives and stuff, they said that they believe Niqui had drove to Dayton herself, and she was looking for these hair and nail vitamins.
And she might have been able to go over to where Tommy Swint just happened to be living, not his house, it was his girlfriend's house. And she just
Mhm.
happened to have them there. And just coincidentally, Niqui might have had to have run into Tommy to get this from her house.
Right.
Okay. And when did this story, did you find out about this story? Do you remember?
About the hair and nail vitamins?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, that was maybe a month after she came up missing.
Okay.
Maybe a month and a half.
And you also mentioned that neighbors might have seen Niqui's vehicle, technically Bobby's vehicle,
Mhm.
in the driveway of this house that
Mhm.
day. That seems to me like a pretty considerable piece of information, but
Mhm.
why didn't the police follow up on that a little harder?
They said that the neighbor wasn't 100% guaranteed that he had his days right, and so they really couldn't question them again about it because they wouldn't give them 100% that it was Sunday and not Saturday
Could
or
have been
any.
another day, and it could have been a
Yeah.
vehicle that looked like
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
vehicle that
They
Niqui was
just said
driving.
they believed they had seen that vehicle there on that Sunday.
Hmm.
So.
Now, there's another story, and this has to do with a couple days afterwards about Tommy Swint and this coworker slash girlfriend of
Mhm.
his, and it had to do with a conflict on which day they came to help for this search.
Mhm.
They couldn't get their story straight. What can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
The police wanted to know which day they was there, on Monday or on Tuesday. And I went to the prison on Monday. That was the day after Niqui came up missing. And I had remembered them telling me that they would be down there the next day and they would be helping with flyers and such. Well, they told the police that they were down there. They weren't down there on Tuesday, they were down there on Monday. And I don't know why the police made that such a big issue, but I guess just trying to figure out where everybody was around the time she came up missing was very important. And they couldn't get their days straight with us. Because we were like, no, they weren't down here then. They were down here this other day, on Tuesday. So that became a big deal. On which day were they actually there?
All right. So was it the day after she disappeared, or was it 2 days after she disappeared that
It
they
was
came?
it was 2 days, and I'm pretty 100% positive that it was 2 days after, because I went to that prison on that Monday to see if my sister had showed up for work. And
Yeah,
that's when they told me she hadn't been there. And
and
that's
that
when I ran
broke
into
down.
them, and they said they were coming out the next day.
Right, and the reason you remember that is because that's a defining moment. That's when
Yeah,
you said, "Man, that's when I knew that my sister, something wrong had happened because she didn't
right,
show up for work."
right.
Okay. Now, there's another interesting story, and we're going to maybe backtrack a little bit, that has something to do with Tommy Swin. If the listeners remember that Tommy and Niqui had a falling out because he invited Niqui to instead of paying him back with money, he wanted her to come over and do some
Mhm,
things with his girlfriend. So they
mhm,
hadn't talked to each other. Maybe they'd seen each other at work, but they just weren't as friendly.
mhm.
But what happened at the bridal shower that Niqui had? Tommy actually sent her a gift,
Yeah, he
and
sent her some lingerie, which we thought was very odd. He had a coworker bring it to him to the shower, and we just all thought it was very odd that this man is sending lingerie to a young lady that's getting married. It's very disrespectful and just plain out rude. Why
yes,
would you do that?
yes, my idea of bridal shower gifts are like toasters and wine
Mhm.
glasses and things like that. And Tommy is sending her something from Victoria's Secret or something, and I'm sure that
Mhm.
raised a lot of eyebrows at that bridal shower.
Right. We just didn't understand. I mean, she looked totally shocked.
Yeah. Do you know? Did she say anything to you about it? Like, well, I'm gonna have to talk to Tommy about this. Anything like that?
Yeah, she was like, I don't know why he would send this to me. Um, she said, when I get to work Monday, me and him are definitely going to have a talk. This ain't right.
The vehicle that she was driving, Bobby Webster's vehicle, was eventually found. When was it found? Where was it found? And what can you tell the listeners all about that? There's some coincidental things regarding this.
Okay. Nikki's vehicle was found on November 3rd of 2001, maybe 3.5 months after her disappearance. It happened to be found at an apartment complex that her daughter's father lived at, that Niqui and Robert had lived at maybe a year before, and it was maybe not even a mile away from where Tommy and Darlene were living.
And this is not in Richmond, Indiana, where Niqui lived, where the laundromat was, where you lived, your sister
Hmm.
lived. This is over in Dayton, Ohio, where this apartment complex is.
Right.
Okay.
Because Nikki had just moved. She had probably been back in Indiana maybe a year. She was still working in Ohio, but she was driving back and forth.
And so Tommy happened to live near there. Uh,
Hmm.
the father of Niqi's daughter lived.
Mhm.
And he still lived in that apartment complex when this happened?
Yeah.
He did.
Mhm.
That is some sort of coincidence. Okay. And
Mhm.
what can you tell the listeners about the vehicle? What condition was it in? What was inside it?
Um, her clothes were still folded in the back of the SUV. The door was ajar. That's how the sheriff kind of rode up on it and noticed the door jarred a little. So he got out, started looking at it, and he noticed that the radio was gone. There was clothes in the back. Uh, they did notice some spider webs and stuff on it. There was papers. From what I remember, there was papers on the floor, and from what they said, they didn't get anything out of it, like as far as forensics or anything. All they got was the laundry bag, pretty much.
And as you said, the laundry wasn't. You have to remind the listeners, this is a few months, 3, 4 months after she disappeared, and the laundry was still folded in the back seat, sitting in the back seat.
Right.
Any idea how long it had been parked there? Did the police have any idea? Did anybody who lived in the apartment complex have any idea?
The police thought that somebody was moving it around on the like somebody had to live close to the complex and was moving it from place to place, parking it in different areas, but on the complex. Um, I had a lady telling me that on a Thursday, they found the vehicle on a Saturday. On the Thursday, that she had noticed the vehicle in the parking lot, and she had mentioned to her husband that, look, that looks like that missing woman's vehicle, and he told her basically, stay out of it. There's no way that it's going to leave it right there. And so she said that she never thought anything else about it until that Saturday when the police showed up and they kind of locked down the complex, and they was going from door to door trying to figure out how this car got out there and maybe was Niqui in one of these apartments. Um,
So what did Niqi's ex have to say about this? The father of her daughter, he's in that complex. I'm sure he was asked about it. He didn't
yeah,
notice it. He didn't notice
he said
it or anything.
he said that he never noticed it. Um, he had lived there, right around the time she came up missing, and he said he had only seen the vehicle a couple of times because this was Robert's vehicle. He was used to seeing Niqi's vehicle when she would drop off the daughter, but he had seen it a couple of times, but he said he never noticed it out there.
But right now, I want to talk about Bobby's ex. This would be the mother of Bobby's child, fiance Bobby. And this would be a woman that Niqui had a problem with going way back to their high school days. You had told me that there was some odd behavior that this woman displayed in the days before Niqui disappeared. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
Niqui was supposed to get married August the 19th. She comes up missing July 22nd. A week before she came up missing, this is his son's mother was living in an apartment complex. Um, a week before her disappearance, she moves. She throws away brand new furniture, TVs. It's just like she was trying to get out of the way fast. So maybe 2 days after Niqui came up missing, we had a man contact my mom and dad and say that they seen a male and a female carrying a girl through this field with a coat on, and it stood out in his head because it was 95 degrees outside late at night, and this person got a coat over this lady's head and body, and they're carrying her through this field.
And where was this? And how close was this to where you live, where the laundromat is, to all of that? Where was this again?
This was maybe, maybe 5 minutes away from the laundromat. This was at where Bobby's son's mother, April, where she lived at. This was right behind her house but she had moved a week before this man had seen, because Niqui didn't come up missing until a week after she had moved. But she lived at this complex where this man had seen him carrying this woman through this field.
And when did you hear that story? How long ago? How long after Niqui disappeared were you told this story?
Maybe a week, 2 weeks afterwards.
And did the police look into it?
They said they did, but there was before Detective Redmond got a hold of the case, there was some other detectives working on it. And there was a lot of things that they waited to do. I don't really think that they took it serious. I don't really think they took it serious. I think that they thought, because the area she was washing clothes at wasn't the best area, and I really believe that they thought, okay, just your average Black woman in this urban area. It was kind of like there was drugs and stuff around the area. I'm not going to sit there and lie. And I think they thought wrong of her until they checked into her as a person and seen okay, this is an uptown citizen. She works in the criminal justice field.
So they kind of the police didn't do everything that they should.
Not in the first couple weeks, no, they didn't.
No, but this Detective Redmond, you have a little more had a little more confidence in him.
Yeah, he got on top of things, and it was weeks later. I mean, come on, where could you be 2 weeks later after she was reported missing on the 22nd? He didn't get it till 2 or 3 weeks later. They weren't looking into it too hard. Everything had to be forced. We begged them to do searches. We begged them to look for a car. I mean, things like that we had to beg them to do because they weren't really thinking nothing big was wrong. Like maybe this woman just doesn't want to get married and she just left. And she'll be back. But it wasn't until Detective Redmond got on the case where he started putting more and more things together, where they realized, okay, this is an endangered missing woman. We have to find her. And we've let 3 weeks go by.
What you have, it seems, is a lot of information. You've had some sightings. You have a sighting of a vehicle out in front of Tommy Swint's house, possibly. You have a sighting of maybe a woman being carried near the house of a woman who had a beef with Niqui. You have the fiance who failed a lie detector test and did some shady things that day, kind of freaked out before it looked like there was any reason to freak out. You got a lot of it. The story really goes in a lot of directions, doesn't it?
Right.
But it seems to me, though, that the story keeps coming back to Tommy Swint, and it has to do with some other things that he was involved in outside of Niqui's disappearance. What went on with Tommy Swint after Niqui disappeared in the next years?
Okay. He became probably the main suspect the police were focusing on, him and the Darlene lady. Um, Found out information about him and stalking other women and um, him being married. Well, we already knew he was married, but him being with the wife and Darlene he was going back and forth all the time. And then he had a whole bunch of different women that he was either trying to pursue or he was um, harassing. Um, Found out that he was into prostitution. Um, he was actually putting girls out there getting money. He was their pimp.
Do you think Niqui knew this about him?
I don't think she knew that much. I do remember her telling me one time that he had given her a ride home from work and she had her hat on. She had a ponytail and she just had her hat over her head. And they went down this particular street where there's you see prostitutes. And she said that they stopped at a stoplight and one walked up to the car and she looked into the car and he had said to her, "How much you gonna charge me to do both of us?" And she said that she smacked him and said, "What are you talking about?" And then he started giggling and he pulled off. And I do know that she knew that he did security at a hotel where he would tell her about prostitutes coming in and out of the hotel. So she had some aspect of it, but as far as the incident that comes later with a woman that he was supposed to have harmed years before Niqui came out missing, I don't think she knew anything about that.
No, and that woman's name was Tina Marie Ivory, and she was
Mhm.
murdered. I mean, 10
Mhm.
years before Niqui disappeared. She was murdered in 1991.
Mhm.
And Tommy was ended up being the main suspect.
Right.
What can you tell the listeners about that?
Okay. It was okay. They had. I guess they had been. Someone had mentioned Tommy's name had been mentioned prior to this cold case detective getting a hold of this Tina Ivory case. And they really never did anything with it. But when this cold case detective came on the board, she looked more into it. And they had an anonymous phone call um, that brought her attention to it. And they told her that she needed to look at Tommy Swint. And she started looking more into it. And then she contacted the Richmond Police Department to see if they had any kind of DNA on him. And they happened to have that DNA, just in case they ever needed it. And she tested the tape, I guess, that was wrapped around the uh, rug or blanket that the woman was wrapped in. And sure enough, it came back to be Tommy Swint's
Uh,
fingerprints.
yeah, they found his fingerprints on the tape that had been
Hmm.
used to wrap this woman, Tina Marie Ivory, and she was what? She was a prostitute.
She was a prostitute.
And the belief is that Tommy Swint was her pimp.
Her pimp and her boyfriend.
Boyfriend. And in that time between, when did this all happen? What year was that he was finally identified? Do you remember what year that was?
Yeah, it was February 2010.
So 9 years, not quite 9 years after Niqui disappears,
Mhm.
Tommy Swint moves on with his life, and in fact, he became a cop at one
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
and then lost that job because he was what? He was because of Niqi's disappearance, because he was a
Right.
suspect in it.
Yeah, because I had got word that he had just got hired on at the police department, and I contacted Redmond, and I told him, and he was so livid. He was like, "How could they possibly give this man a job as a police officer when he is a person of interest in the disappearance of an endangered missing woman? It's been all over the TV. They know." And so he contacted them. They said they didn't know. And he said, "I don't understand, how don't you do background? You know, I'm a police officer. I know what you got to do to become a cop." And they said they did everything they were supposed to do. But I found out that there was a couple things that they went around doing because Tommy knew a lot of the right people. If he knew a lot of the right people, so he wouldn't have to do things other officers may have had to do to become police officers.
So,
So
so he lost his job. I think he tried to sue the department, right? And
yeah, he tried to sue the department. He tried to sue a couple newspapers. He tried to sue me, and the judge pretty much just threw it out and laughed in his face. And then at that time, that's when he felt like he was blackballed from this, Dayton, Ohio area. So then that's when he moved down there in Alabama.
and then 2010 comes around. I'm going to ask you this: if you want to say if you have a suspicion, you can say. If you don't want to say, that's fine. Do you
Mhm.
have any suspicion? Have you ever thought about it? Who the anonymous tipster might have been that led police to suspect Tommy in Tina Marie Ivory's disappearance? Have any ideas who that anonymous tipster might have been?
I'm not 100% on that, but I have an idea, and I believe it was. I'm not going to say their name, but I believe it was a co-worker of Nikki's and his, and I believe he overheard a conversation. From what I was told, he overheard a conversation of Tommy talking to another man, making jokes about it.
That's interesting.
And
Okay.
when he heard it, that's when he called it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad if that's how it went down. I'm glad he did. Very good.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, where is Tommy now?
He killed himself.
He killed himself when the police came after him after he was identified and they came after him.
After he was indicted for Tina Ivory.
That kind of do you think that kind of makes maybe Nikki's disappearance a little harder to solve?
Extra harder. Extra harder.
I mean, I know that you might have some harbor some feelings against him and your family, but you surely did not want him to commit suicide or die or anything like that, right?
No, I believe he was being a coward. He was taking the easy way out. He harmed a lot of women. Not just Tina Ivory, and if he harmed my sister, but there was other encounters with women that he scared, and that I found out that he took advantage of. I kind of became a detective, not wanting to become a detective when it came to Tommy Swinton. I learned a lot about him and the things that he was into, and he took a lot of things with him. If these women are telling the truth of the things that he did to them, and I believe that he took a coward way out. Um, Whoever the person is that took Niqui away, um, if that's the case, I want to be able to look them in the face and ask them why. Why would you take this mother away from her child? Why would you take this child away from her mother and father? Why would you break a family into pieces? For what? And I want to be able to ask them that question. And if that's Tommy Swint, I will never be able to ask him those questions. So I was very angry. In fact, I was livid when I found out he killed himself. Because in my heart, I really believe that Tommy Swint knows what happened to my sister. I do believe that he has had either pillow talk with his wife or a girlfriend, or he's had an accomplice. I believe someone out there knows something, but I believe Tommy Swint did something to my sister, and we may never find out unless one of these other people come forth.
She never said to you that, Tommy hit me or punched me, or she never had to go to the hospital because of Tommy or anything like that, right?
No, she was just scared. I mean, he was just like, this was like maybe a few weeks before she had came up missing. Bobby had started dropping her off at another coworker's house because he had to be at work at 5 in the morning, and Niqui had to be at work at 7. So he would drop her off at the coworker's house, and then her and Niqui would ride to work together. And there was numerous times that they would come outside, and Tommy be sitting there waiting for Niqui to come out. And the coworker said a lot of times she would come outside and tell him to leave. So he just started being a very very stalking, and I know that to be true because more than one woman has came up and told me that he did the same thing to them. So, as far as putting his hands on her or anything, not to my knowledge, other than me walking in on him and him leaning over on her and she screams, he's trying to rape me. But she never told me anything about him putting his hands on her.
You'd mentioned something early in the conversation. I want to follow it up with it right now. Before Niqui disappeared, you said something about you had been getting some phone calls with people hanging up. They'd call, you'd answer the phone, then hang up. Did that continue after Niqui disappeared, and did you ever figure out who that might have been?
I never figured out who that was. It stopped later I never went back home after I left because that's when she came up missing. But why the next day when I went back to my house, I never got any more. So it was just that one day, like right around the time that all this was happening, that they was calling, hanging up.
And did any of you have cell phones at the time? You, Niqui, anybody else in your family?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Well, we didn't have cell phones. Robert had, Bobby had got a couple cell phones after the fact that she's missing, but no one had them before.
Okay. What did this do to your family, Michelle? I mean, I know that, it's been 16 years now. How's it been?
Well, 3.5 years into this, my dad died. My family we were once a very close-knit family. We're all living separate lives, hardly talking to one another. It's kind of pulled us so far apart. Nikki's daughter has been married now. She's married now. Niqui has a grandchild that she knows nothing about.
And the little girl that may never know her grandmother, Nikki's daughter went from being a 9-year-old girl with a mom to living all this time not knowing where her mom is. But to be honest with you, even through all that, she has made a lot of accomplishments, even through the hard times of not knowing where her mom is. And I'm very proud of her.
Do you see a lot? Her name is Peyton?
Peyton, yeah.
Do you see a lot of her? Do you see a lot of Niqui in her?
Yeah. If she smiles, it's like watching Niqui smile. Yeah, you can see Niqui a lot through Peyton. She's doing okay. She's got a little girl now, and she's married, and she's still, now that she's old enough to, because we kept a lot of stuff from her until she was, a good age to know things. And, she's doing her own thing, trying to find out what happened to her mom. And brothers and sisters, even I myself, I kind of fallen apart. I got a lot of things going on with my health. I found out I have Parkinson's. I kind of just like when all this happened, I put so much into it. I kind of forgot about myself and my family, and I neglected my kids because I was so focused on finding my sister and my marriage, and then I got sick, and I've been diagnosed with being disabled since 2008. I'm not allowed to drive anymore. I have a nurse that comes and checks on me once a week, and I do have I did have another child in 2009, and she has autism, so I'm also dealing with that. And it's just did a lot of damage, but I'm still so driven and focused to find out what happened to my sister, no matter how long it takes me, even if I have to do it by myself. I will forever be Niqui's voice, and no one will never forget about Niqui. In one way or another, I will get justice for my sister, even if it kills me doing it. My mom, she's 76 now, so she's getting, her age is getting up there, and she's had numerous health problems. In fact, right now she's in the hospital, and she blames herself constantly because she let Niqui walk out that door, and she wonders if I would have went with her, would we have the same outcome we have today? And I tried to let her know, Mom, it wasn't your fault. How did you know? How did you know? I mean, that's the last thing you think, that your child's gonna come up missing.
Of course.
Of
course.
So, yeah, it's kind of tore my family apart. We all have our own belief on who we think is involved, but majority of us think it was Tommy Swint. I know a couple of them think that Tommy and Bobby may have had something to do with it together. And then there's a few that just just don't know. I don't want to point fingers at nobody without any proof, without any facts. I'm not going to blame Tommy, Robert, or whoever. I want to know. So I myself think that Tommy knows what happened to my sister.
Do you think that her being nervous that day when she went over to her mother's, do you think that her being nervous is directly related to her disappearing?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that possibly this is that do you think that she was kind of lying to your mother when your mother asked what was bothering you, and she said it was some Hispanic guys down at the
Oh,
laundromat?
I'm 100% positive that she lied to my mom
She
because
lied.
Nikki was so independent. I mean, she thought she could handle anybody and everybody. And being in her field, and she worked as a hostage negotiator, and she dealt with men that committed crimes on a daily, that was her job. So she felt like she could handle things. She didn't need to tell mom and dad what was going on. She was scared. Nikki was never scared. So how could she tell them she's scared? Because she tried to portray like she was never scared. And I know for a fact that if she got scared at the laundromat or with the phone calls, whatever had her pacing back and forth, that she would have never had told my mom the truth.
Of course.
Never. But she wouldn't have wanted her worrying, and you know, she just thought she was this big, strong. She was as small as a pea, but she thought she could conquer the world. And she challenged many people. She didn't let her little size stop her.
You have a website or a Facebook page set up for
Hmm.
your sister Niqui. Why don't you tell the listeners what it is?
Mr. Niqui McCown. I've had it up. I can't remember when I started it. It's been a good 5 or 6 years now.
Okay.
And I got I think over 2,000 Facebook friends on there. And I just talk to people, try to let them know what's going on, if anything's changed. I've gotten to, a lot of people like yourself that I came across because of the Facebook page.
Sure.
So it's been a great tool. Social media is a way to accomplish a lot of things nowadays,
Right.
and it's helped out a lot. It's got a lot of doors open. Still don't know where Nikki is. Still don't know what happened to her, but it gives me a reason to feel like I have not stopped. I'm still searching for her. I'm still searching for you, Nikki. I haven't given up on you. So every time I put a post up or whatever, I feel like I'm still doing something. Even though my health isn't the best like it was back then, I'm still able to do something. And I never want to stop doing for my sister because somewhere out there, somebody knows something.
Yeah.
Someone knows what happened to Niqui McCown. And whether it be on social media or by word of mouth, one day, Nikki will have justice.
And I'm going to, of course, they'll be hearing the listeners will be hearing this episode this Friday. But between now, us doing this interview on Monday night, and Friday, I will be linking to that to make sure everybody knows where to go. From the
Hmm.
Unfound Podcast discussion group, I know you're in there, And
Mhm.
on Instagram and other places, I'll make sure that people are directed there. So I'm hoping to get a lot more people, to join your page so they can follow what you've been doing. And, hopefully we'll get some listeners interested in Niqi's disappearance. Maybe they can help you out. Maybe they have some insight. Maybe somebody knows something. Just
I appreciate you 150%.
thank you. Thank you. Any last words, Michelle, before we conclude this interview?
I just want to personally, of course, thank you, and to just say to anyone out there that has a missing loved one, don't ever give up. Become their voice. Continue to fight for them. You don't know how it feels to live in the not knowing until it happens to you. So we have to never give up on our loved one and continue to fight for them. And it's people like you yourself that gives us that hope. And I really appreciate talking with you tonight, and thank you for having me on your show.
Michelle, you're welcome. And I appreciate you joining me on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And that was my 2017 interview with Niqi's sister, Michelle Luster. I thank her for doing such a complete interview 7 years ago. Really, where does the time go? Okay, so now my new 2024 insight into Niqi's disappearance. In listening to the entire interview again, I came away with a totally new collection of ideas from what I had in 2017. Here are a few of those ideas. Probably the most shocking idea. I have new strong doubts Niqui had any intention of marrying her fiancé. This does not mean she planned her own disappearance. However, this calls into question if Niqui was really being honest with everyone around her. And when missing people are not honest before they go missing, then almost any cause of a disappearance must be contemplated. Now, why do I have my doubts about Niqi's intention to get married? Well, obviously, the church situation. Owing money to Tommy, a pimp, that speaks for itself, and the vitamin story, which is almost surely a lie. And I think this is the reason the fiancé acted the way he did. Maybe Niqui even told him in one of those mysterious phone calls. Either way, I think the fiancé knew the wedding wasn't going to happen. And that's why he was hysterical and cashed in on the ring and everything else that went on. Yes, I know, Niqi's family will say otherwise, but they don't have explanations for the above issues either, except to be suspicious of the fiancé or Tommy or whoever else. But the problem is this. Not all of these men conspired to kill Niqui if she were murdered at all. At some point, you have to pick one. Meaning logically, a person can't say the fiancé acted suspiciously while at the same time say Tommy killed Niqui, for example. Next, new idea. My database tells me that at the time, Tommy Swint lived less than 2 miles from where the car was found in Dayton. So he easily could have dumped it there, knowing that investigators would think that the ex caused Niqi's disappearance. Yet, would he not realize that the police would see through this pretty quickly? Not to mention, is there any proof that Tommy Swint even knew where Niqi's ex lived? You have to decide that for yourselves. Another new idea. Surprisingly, given what we know about Niqui, this does not appear to be a situation where she was stalked. Remember, the clothes were folded. Whatever happened to her, Niqui chose to be where she was. So even though we know Tommy Swint to be a killer, and he surely had all the traits of a guy who would follow women around, there is no proof he or anyone else trailed Niqui that day. Meaning, if Niqui was murdered, whoever did so woke up that day not planning to kill her. Overall, and I know this sounds crazy, here in 2024, I'm much more open to the idea that Niqui took off all on her own than I was back then in 2017. Why? What are the odds that on the same day she complained about Hispanic men giving her the creeps, despite there being no proof these men even existed, that she would go missing? Unless you believe these Hispanic men killed her. But then how did these random Hispanic men know where her ex lived so as to plant her car there? To me, this almost sounds like Niqui was setting up something. Then you combine that with the vitamin story, the church story, that as a soon-to-be-married, allegedly, woman, that Niqui owed money to another man who was a pimp. Any one of these issues by itself may not be a big deal, but you combine all of these facts and the possibility of a walk-off becomes more prominent. Yes, murder by Tommy Swint is still number one, but in my mind, it's not as obvious as it used to be. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.